Dawn broke cold and grey over the Atlantic on November 12, 1942. Off the coast of West Africa, Allied convoys ploughed steadily through heavy seas, black smoke trailing from funnels, deck crews braced against the salt wind. German U-boats lurked in the depths, their captains confident that their steel predators could bleed the convoys dry. Yet what unsettled them most was not the sight of destroyers on the horizon or aircraft overhead. It was the sheer number of cargo ships appearing, again and again, as if from nowhere. They sank one, and another two arrived within weeks. They torpedoed three, and yet fresh hulls, clean paint still gleaming, joined the convoys before their wakes had faded. The Kriegsmarine had calculated industrial attrition, but what they could not fathom was how the Americans were replacing ships faster than the Germans could sink them. Kriegsmarine Operations Log, November 1942. In Berlin, intelligence officers examined intercepted reports. They whispered of a new miracle of production. Liberty ships, merchant vessels supposedly being launched in a matter of days, not months. To seasoned German logisticians, this was impossible. Traditional shipbuilding, even in efficient yards, demanded half a year, sometimes more, to produce a single ocean-going freighter. Yet by late 1942, Allied ports brimmed with Liberty ships, each one laden with tanks, aircraft, munitions and wheat. The Reich's High Command could not understand how this tide was being sustained. Oberkommando der Marine, report, December 1942. The truth, however, was written not on the sea, but in the noise of rivet guns and the thunder of cranes far away in American shipyards. Henry J. Kaiser, a construction magnate with no traditional background in shipbuilding, had reimagined the process itself. Instead of crafting a ship like an artisan carves wood, Kaiser and his engineers treated the Liberty ship as a machine, standardized, simplified, modular. Welded seams replaced rivets, prefabricated sections rolled out of factories inland, hauled by rail to coastal yards where entire hulls were assembled like colossal steel puzzles. Thousands of workers, many of them women stepping into heavy industry for the first time, donned overalls and masks, transforming America's waterfronts into forges of democracy. U.S. Maritime Commission Report, 1943. On December 30, 1941, the keel of the SS Patrick Henry was laid down. Within 244 days, it was launched, shocking even those who had designed it. But the real astonishment came later. On November 10, 1942, the SS Robert E. Peary was completed in just 4 days, 15 hours and 26 minutes at the Permanente Metals Yard in Richmond, California. German intelligence refused to believe the reports, dismissing them as Allied propaganda. And yet photographs existed: steel hull, deck cranes, crew waving as the freshly christened vessel slid into the water. Richmond Shipyard Records, 1942. For men of the U-boat arm, already stretched thin across the Atlantic, this was a nightmare. Every torpedo expended was being nullified by American factories that worked on a different clock entirely. The Liberty ship was not elegant. At 441 feet long, 57 feet wide, displacing 14,245 tons fully loaded, it was a boxy, lumbering freighter, capable of just 11 knots. Sailors often joked that a Liberty ship had 2 speeds, slow and stop. Yet what mattered was not grace, but quantity. Each could carry over 9,000 tons of cargo, enough to supply an armored division for days. Tanks clanked into their holds, aircraft fuselages lay lashed beneath tarps, and crates of ammunition lined their decks. Built for $2 million apiece, they were expendable by design. If one went down, another was already being welded into being. U.S. Maritime Commission Specifications, 1942. To the Germans, this industrial flood defied logic. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat arm, pressed his crews harder, demanding more sinkings, more aggression. Yet his own reports admitted the problem. Enemy merchant losses are being replaced at a rate beyond our projections. BDU War Diary, January 1943. In the Atlantic, U-boat wolf packs struck convoys, tearing burning gaps in their columns. But within weeks, convoys reformed, filled once more with Liberty ships. It was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. Meanwhile, in the shipyards, The transformation of labor was as dramatic as the ships themselves. At Richmond alone, over 90,000 workers toiled day and night, many of them African Americans, Mexican immigrants, and women who had never touched steel before the war. Welding schools sprang up, training thousands in weeks. Cafeterias fed armies of workers, while childcare centers allowed mothers to contribute. This was war industry as total mobilization, factories not only producing steel, but reshaping American society. Kaiser Shipyard Employment Records, 1943. And yet, for all its miracles, the system was strained. Welding, while faster than riveting, introduced brittle fractures in cold Atlantic waters, causing some Liberty ships to split apart without warning. The engineers responded in kind, redesigning hull joints, reinforcing keels, learning from each failure. The speed of production was maintained, not by ignoring mistakes, but by absorbing them, correcting them, and driving forward without pause. Bureau of Ships Technical Bulletin, 1943. In January 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached its crescendo. Convoys like HX 222 steamed through sleet and fog, Liberty ships at their heart, while German wolf packs lunged from the depths. The seas boiled with explosions, deck guns spat fire into the night, and SOS signals crackled through the ether. And still, behind the chaos of battle, new Liberty ships were sliding down the ways in Portland, Baltimore, New Orleans, and Los Angeles. The convoys were bleeding, but they would not run dry. U.S. Navy Atlantic Convoy Report, February 1943. For the German sailor watching through a periscope, it felt like sorcery. Sink one ship, and two more appeared. Fire a spread of torpedoes, and yet the convoy column filled again the following month. The truth was harsher. It was not magic, but industry, not illusion, but logistics. The American factory was the unseen weapon, hammering steel into hulls at a tempo the Axis could neither match nor comprehend. And so, as 1943 dawned, the U-boats found themselves confronting an enemy beyond their reach. They could stalk, attack, destroy, but they could not defeat an assembly line. Each Liberty ship carried more than cargo. It carried the weight of a nation's will, the sweat of welders, the brilliance of engineers, the vision of men like Kaiser, who understood that in modern war, time itself was a weapon. Yet the true scale of this hidden advantage, the engineering secrets, the industrial choreography, the decisive battles these ships sustained, was still to come. And when it emerged, it would not only turn the tide of the Atlantic, but redefine the very meaning of warfare. Darkness cloaked the North Atlantic on March 16, 1943. Convoy SC-122, bound from New York to Liverpool, stretched across the storm-lashed sea, 40 merchantmen, escorted by a thin screen of destroyers and corvettes. Among them were Liberty ships, their decks piled with crates and armored vehicles lashed under tarps. To the German Wolfpack Robegraf, lying in wait, it seemed an easy target. Torpedoes slashed through the waves, detonations lit the night sky, and radio operators shouted bearings into the fog. Yet when the smoke cleared, the truth revealed itself. For every Liberty ship crippled, more convoys were already forming, more hulls steaming westward, each one born not of time-honored craft, but of industrial revolution. U.S. Navy Atlantic War Diary, March 1943. The secret lay in speed. Where German Type 9 submarines took over 2 years to design and launch, an American Liberty ship could be finished in weeks. Engineers at the U.S. Maritime Commission, led by Admiral Emory S. Land, had designed the EC-2SC-1 hull type for one purpose: rapid, repeatable mass production. Each ship was built from 250 prefabricated sections, manufactured inland by companies like Bethlehem Steel, and then shipped to coastal yards. A bow could be constructed in Pittsburgh, a stern in Detroit, then transported by rail to Richmond or Portland, where Kaiser's crews welded them together like steel building blocks. Technical Manual TM 9294 1943. The innovation of welding over riveting cut construction time by half. Traditional rivets required teams of skilled men, heating, hammering, and sealing each joint. Welding needed fewer hands, more speed, and far less specialized training. By 1943, More than 60% of Liberty ship workers were new to heavy industry, trained in weeks rather than years. This democratization of shipbuilding stunned observers. A welder's arc, bright against the night, replaced the sound of rivet hammers. Each spark meant hours saved. Each seam meant another ship closer to launch. Bureau of Ships Report, 1943. German intelligence, analyzing aerial reconnaissance of American shipyards, could scarcely believe the scale. Richmond's Yard No. 2 had 1,000 footways, cranes towering over a mile of waterfront, 42 acres of workshops, and rail lines feeding steel around the clock. Kaiser's assembly line for ships astonished even seasoned naval engineers. In April 1943, a dramatized composite German officer was recorded as saying, "They do not build ships. They grow them from the ground, like weeds. Sink one, and another sprouts." Allied Interrogation Records, 1945. Technically, the Liberty ship was no marvel of design. Its triple expansion steam engine, generating 2,500 horsepower, was obsolete by the 1920s, capable of pushing the hull only to 11 knots. Its armament, typically a single 4-inch or 5-inch stern gun, a 3-inch bow gun, and a smattering of 20 mm Oerlikons, was barely sufficient against surfaced U-boats or Luftwaffe bombers. But simplicity was its strength. Engines could be built by machine shops across the Midwest. Weapons were standardized Navy stock. No scarce alloys or rare parts were needed. Everything was designed for scale, not elegance. U.S. Maritime Commission Specifications, 1943. The decisive proof of this industrial weapon came in the Battle of the Atlantic's bloodiest month, March 1943. Convoys SC-122 and HX-229 together faced 41 U-boats. Over 6 days of relentless combat, 21 merchant ships were lost, including several Liberty ships. Flames and oil slicks scarred the sea. Survivors clung to rafts as wolf packs circled. But while German commanders celebrated, the true balance sheet told another story. Within the same month, American yards launched over 70 new Liberty ships, more than triple the number destroyed. U.S. Strategic Shipping Report, 1943. For every hull torn apart in the mid-Atlantic, 3 more slid down the ways in Baltimore, Mobile, and San Francisco. Even failures became lessons. Early Liberty ships rushed into service, suffered catastrophic hull fractures in icy waters. Some cracked clean in two without enemy action. Critics called them Kaiser's coffins. Yet the Bureau of Ships responded with forensic engineering, reinforcing joints, modifying steel compositions, and redesigning weld patterns. By late 1943, fracture incidents dropped sharply. The system did not stall, it evolved under fire. This capacity to adapt was as deadly to Germany as any convoy escort. Bureau of Ships Technical Bulletin, 1943. Meanwhile, the convoys themselves became stages where the Liberty ship's role grew undeniable. On July 10, 1943, during the invasion of Sicily, Liberty ships carried the bulk of Operation Husky's supplies, tanks, trucks, fuel, and rations for hundreds of thousands of men. German and Italian aircraft strafed the beaches, yet the freighters unloaded relentlessly, cranes swinging, ramps clattering, holds spewing war material. Without the Liberty ships, the Allied invasion timetable would have collapsed. With them it surged forward. U.S. Army After Action Report, Sicily, 1943. The German reaction bordered on disbelief. Dunitz's war diary reveals bitter frustration. "We cannot comprehend their output. For every vessel destroyed, another arrives. Our tonnage war is failing." BDU War Diary, August 1943. Submarine aces like Otto Kretschmer, once celebrated for sinking thousands of tons, watched in despair as convoys grew larger, escorts stronger, and merchantmen seemingly inexhaustible. The psychological toll was immense. Crews began to feel they were not fighting men but machines, factories across the ocean that could not be sunk. On the Allied side, morale soared. Merchant sailors, often overlooked, began to believe they were part of something larger. Every Liberty ship was a symbol, proof that no matter how dangerous the Atlantic, their voyage carried the weight of an entire nation's effort. "We are sailing in steel built by hands like our own families," One sailor wrote home, and that makes us believe the sea can be beaten. Merchant Marine Letter, 1943. The numbers told the story with cold precision. By the end of 1943, over 1,600 Liberty ships had been launched. By war's end, the total reached 2,710, an armada of steel freighters unmatched in history. At peak, a new Liberty ship joined the fleet every 42 hours. U.S. Maritime Commission Production Records, 1945. Each one was a logistical weapon, multiplying Allied reach, stretching supply lines across oceans, and rendering the U-boat campaign futile. Yet to understand the full scale of the Liberty ship miracle, one must look beyond the docks and convoys, into the vast machinery of American society that powered them. It was not only engineers and welders, but miners pulling ore from Appalachia, rail crews hauling steel to the coasts, factory foremen in Chicago, stamping out valves, women riveting decks under floodlights, and even children collecting scrap for the furnaces. The Liberty ship was not just a vessel, it was America itself condensed into steel, launched against tyranny. And as 1943 ended, the German command was forced to face a grim truth. The Battle of the Atlantic was tilting. The Liberty ship, underestimated, ridiculed, even derided, had proven itself not by speed or firepower, but by something far greater, the industrial will of a nation. But its influence did not stop at the water's edge. For the Liberty ship was more than a convoy freighter. It was a weapon that altered the strategy of entire campaigns, reshaped the morale of nations, and foreshadowed the wars yet to come. And in that shift lay the true legacy, the hidden power that Section 3 will uncover. By the spring of 1944, the Atlantic no longer felt like a battlefield balanced on a knife's edge. The U-boat menace, once a specter that stalked every convoy, was fading. Allied radar, long-range patrol bombers and hunter-killer groups played their part. But the true weapon, the one German admirals admitted they could not defeat, was already steaming in endless grey columns across the sea. The Liberty ship had transformed the war's logistics. It was not a vessel of elegance or speed, but of persistence, a steel promise that the Allies would not run dry, no matter how many submarines prowled the depths. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. For the men on the convoys, the difference was tangible. In 1942, merchant sailors had felt isolated, their lifelines fragile, every sinking a devastating blow. By 1944, however, convoys were so dense with Liberty ships that losses seemed almost absorbed by sheer numbers. Supplies flowed steadily into Britain, tanks for the armored divisions gathering in the English countryside, fuel for the thousands of aircraft lining the airfields, rations for the millions of men preparing for the liberation of Europe. The invasion of Normandy itself would have been impossible without Liberty ships. In June 1944, more than 4,000 merchant vessels, the majority Liberty class, carried the invasion's lifeblood, 150,000 vehicles, 570,000 tons of supplies, and enough ammunition to sustain the assault for weeks. U.S. Army Quartermaster Report, June 1944. German prisoners of war, interrogated after the landings, expressed disbelief. "We saw your ships fall in flames," one naval officer lamented, "but they returned again, endless, like ants from a nest." Allied POW interrogation, July 1944. This was the psychological collapse the Liberty ship induced. U-boat commanders no longer felt like predators. They felt like men flailing against a tide. The once proud tonnage war had been reduced to futility. Each sinking, once a triumph, was now a hollow gesture. The Reich could not sink America's factories. The Allied side experienced the inverse effect: confidence, even pride. For the welders of Richmond, Portland, and Baltimore, every launched hull became a visible blow against fascism. Families gathered at the rails to watch Liberty ships slide into the water, christened with champagne and cheers. Women welders, dubbed Wendy the Welder, saw their work celebrated in newspapers, their sparks lighting the path to victory. African American and immigrant laborers, often segregated in civilian life, found their efforts acknowledged as essential to the nation's survival. The Liberty ship was not merely steel and rivets, it was a symbol of collective purpose. Kaiser Shipyard Records, 1944. Technicians and engineers carried burdens of their own. Maintenance crews in the field learned to keep the Liberty ships running despite brittle fractures, boiler failures, or torpedo scars. They welded patches mid-ocean, replaced plates in forward bases, and found ways to keep aging engines turning. Without their ingenuity, the fleet would have faltered. Yet they worked in anonymity, their names lost in technical reports, their labor preserving the miracle of supply. The war was not won only by soldiers on the beaches, but by men and women in oil-stained overalls with blowtorches in hand. Bureau of Ships Repair Report, 1944. As the war shifted toward victory, the strategic impact of the Liberty ship became clearer. The Soviet Union, locked in titanic struggle on the Eastern Front, relied heavily on Allied aid. Through Arctic convoys to Murmansk and Archangel, Liberty ships carried thousands of Studebaker trucks, P-39 fighters, canned meat, and raw materials. Stalin himself acknowledged their role, remarking that without American transport, the Red Army could not have sustained its offensive. Soviet Lend-Lease Report, 1945. Thus the Liberty ship not only supplied Western armies, but also fueled the Eastern hammer blows that shattered the Wehrmacht. By war's end, 2,710 Liberty ships had been built. They carried two-thirds of all cargo delivered during the conflict, over 200 million tons. Their survival rate, once doubted, exceeded expectations. More than 2,400 remained afloat in 1945, many battered but unbroken. U.S. Maritime Commission Records, 1945. For Germany, the tonnage war was lost. Its U-boat fleet bled white in a campaign that could never overcome the torrent of steel flowing from American yards. Yet, the legacy did not end with the armistice. Thousands of Liberty ships continued to ply the seas into the 1950s, their boxy silhouettes familiar in ports worldwide. Some were scrapped, some converted into training hulks, others sold into commercial service. A handful survived into the Gulf War era as floating warehouses. Their DNA lived on in Cold War sealift strategy, standardization, modularity, and scale. The very concept of prefabricated naval construction inspired future generations, from Vietnam-era supply fleets to the container ships that knit together the modern global economy. Maritime Administration Study, 1960. But their deeper legacy was psychological. The Liberty ship demonstrated that in total war, the decisive weapon was not always a tank, plane, or battleship, but the capacity to produce, adapt, and endure. For German officers, post-war interrogations often returned to disbelief at the numbers. "We did not lose to your soldiers," one dramatized composite remarked. "We lost to your factories." U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. For the Allies, the lesson was one of faith in collective strength. A welder's spark in California, a miner's shovel in Pennsylvania, a machinist's lathe in Detroit, all had direct consequence on the battlefields of Normandy, the deserts of North Africa, the ruins of Stalingrad. The Liberty ship condensed this vast human effort into a steel hull that braved torpedoes and storms, proving that wars are not won by courage alone, but by the relentless supply of means to fight. As the world moved into the uncertain dawn of the Cold War, generals and policymakers carried forward that truth. In Korea, in Vietnam, in the Gulf, the lesson of Liberty ships lived on. Logistics is destiny, and the power to replace, sustain, and overwhelm will always outlast the strike of any enemy weapon. And so the Liberty ship, humble and ungainly, stood as one of the war's great paradoxes. Derided at first as disposable, ugly ducklings, they became swans of strategy, unheralded giants, whose true beauty lay in their numbers, their persistence, their inevitability. One final photograph captures their essence. A convoy stretching to the horizon, Liberty ships shoulder to shoulder, grey silhouettes against the sea. Above them, clouds part, light glimmers on their decks, and the caption reads, "Built in days, sailed for years, remembered forever." National Archives photo collection. In the end, their legacy is not confined to steel or statistics, but to a universal truth, one that speaks across generations in modern war: connection outweighs firepower, and endurance defeats destruction.